I mean, for starters, today, Donald Trump made his most explicit comments yet about his openness to deporting American citizens. And yes, his intention is to scare you. And yeah, the things he's saying are scary. I'm not going to minimize that. But his comments are also a reminder that aspiring dictators, of which he is one, who threaten to deport their own citizens, are not speaking from a position of strength. They are speaking from a position of weakness. And the cracks are showing all over the place right now. And so tonight, I actually wanted to start in one of the places where the cracks are the biggest and most obvious, and that's the economy, where Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs have everyone from conservative Republicans to Wall Street billionaires to even rural farmers saying, what in the world is that guy doing? And we are seeing that sentiment very clearly in the polls, too. I mean, in a new CBS YouGov poll that was released just yesterday, a majority of Americans said the economy is getting worse. And a growing number of Americans say Trump's policies are making them financially worse off. You can see the chart on the screen right now, and you can see it shows a 7-point jump on that question from just last month. The majority of Americans are also against Trump's tariff and trade policy. But the news gets even worse for Trump. Get a load of this. When the people in this poll were asked who would benefit most from Trump's tariffs, 3/4 of Americans said the wealthy. And 71% said large corporations. I think everybody knows how popular the wealthy and large corporations are. Not very popular at all. Just imagine how well it's going to sit with the majority of Americans when Congress returns in May, just in a couple weeks, and focuses all their time on cutting taxes for the wealthy and large corporations, which is what they're going to do. But the upshot is this. Trump is underwater. He's losing popularity faster than any new president has in recent history, other than, well, of course, Donald Trump in 2017. But it's really not a mystery as to why. I mean, weirdly, not much has changed since James Carville proclaimed that one of the core messages for a presidential campaign was, it's the economy, stupid. And right now, Trump's actions have created an enormous amount of confusion and instability in the economy. I mean, he single-handedly issued a decree that Chinese imports will get tariffs of 20%. Wait, no, 104%. No, 125. Hang on. Now it's 145%. Oh, but smartphones and computers are exempt, at least for now. You can't make plans around that. No one can. Whether you're putting together a household budget or a business plan for a small business or a huge company. And some of the sectors that are being hit the hardest are the ones that elected him to begin with. Sectors like farmers in North Carolina. I mean, this was in the Washington Post this morning. Quote, midway through the spring planting season, farmers in a state whose electoral votes went to Trump in the past 3 elections are struggling with the unpredictability of his tariffs, which threaten their access to foreign markets and add a heavy dose of uncertainty to an already capricious undertaking. Should they plant more soybeans? Well, most of that crop gets sold to China, but maybe not now, I guess. Whenever you do to plant now, you have to hope Trump doesn't kill the foreign market for that crop before you harvest in a few months. That's how they have to plan, just like any business. It's that kind of uncertainty that has absolutely pounded the stock market, a huge number of industries, and also Americans' 401k accounts. But here's another thing that stuck out to me about the complete mismanagement of all of this by the Trump administration. They seem to be some sort of a state of aloof denial about the impact this chaos and uncertainty is having on real people. I mean, remember, according to Trump's Treasury Secretary, nobody's paying any attention out there.
What is your message to Americans who want to retire right now and who've just seen their lifetime savings drop significantly?
Well, Chris, I think that's a false narrative. Americans who want to retire right now, the Americans who have put away for years in their savings accounts, I think they don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations of what's happening.
I mean, the thing is, that's not true, obviously. But the New York Times did something that's pretty interesting, just to sort of illustrate this point. They asked Americans near retirement what they thought of Besson's comment that I just played. And 400 people responded. People like Becky O'Hara of Havertown, Pennsylvania, who said, quote, we are definitely looking at the fluctuations and likely adding time to our need to work timeline. Mr. Besson is mistaken. Or Nancy London of Plain City, Ohio, who said this, I have Parkinson's disease and I'm unable to work in any capacity. Naturally, I closely watch how the market performs on a daily basis. Or Barbara Costanzo of Milwaukee, who is even more blunt, saying, quote, they have no idea how ordinary people live. Same with Cleo LaRue of League City, Texas, who said, of course I'm watching. I'm disheartened that he and President Trump seem to be treating my hard-earned savings in such a cavalier manner. And people like Karen Walworth of Beaverton, Oregon, are understandably worried about how this impacts her retirement plan. She said, I wanted to retire and still wait until 70 to collect Social Security. And that's a delicate balance if the value of my investments has dropped significantly. And I think many people can sympathize with Jean Teague of Austin, Texas, who said this. Yes, I'm checking. It's a compulsive behavior right now, though I haven't looked yet today. Why? I do not know. Please, no tariffs on Xanax. Many people see you, Jean. The point is, everyone's paying attention. Wall Street's paying attention. Republicans are paying attention. Farmers in North Carolina are paying attention. Of course they are. It impacts their businesses. Basically, every American in every corner of the country is paying attention. The whole tariff saga is hurting Trump politically because it is hurting so many Americans directly. This is obviously breaking through because it affects everyone. Now, the conventional wisdom says that won't happen on other issues Trump's taking a hard line on, like, say, immigration. But I think in this moment, that's actually wrong. I mean, I get, like, at first glance, people might not universally feel that the story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia applies to them like tariffs do. Even if you feel horrified and outraged, maybe it feels far away. Maybe it feels like it could never happen to you or anyone you know. But it's not. And it could happen to you or someone you know. I know everybody watching right now has probably followed this story, but it's still worth restating. I mean, Abrego Garcia is a Maryland father and legal U.S. resident who was deported to a mega prison in El Salvador in a move the government has admitted happened by mistake. At no point has anyone in the U.S. or in El Salvador charged him with a crime. And so the Supreme Court said the Trump administration needs to get him back and can't deport him without a trial. But Trump's ignoring all of that, saying it's up to El Salvador's dictator to determine whether or not a legal U.S. resident gets to come back to the country or spend the rest of his life in a prison abroad. And if that weren't horrifying enough, which it absolutely should be, Trump took things one big step further during his meeting with the president of El Salvador today.
Homegrown criminals next. Yeah. I said, homegrowns are next. The homegrowns. You got to build about 5 more places.
Yeah, that's big.
All right? It's not big enough.
5 more places, which you just heard him say. Now, to be clear, by 5 more places, Trump means 5 more prison camps. And by homegrowns are next, he means American citizens are next. If that wasn't clear enough, he said it out loud in the Oval Office just moments later.
I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
I mean, so today it's homegrown criminals who push people into subways, as Trump defines them, by the way. But tomorrow, could it be lawyers, journalists, Democrats, people Donald Trump just doesn't like? We've heard a million times from his lackeys that he's just joking, he's just saying that, it's not actual policy. But the thing is, what he's saying is also pretty consistent with what his administration is doing behind the scenes. Like having DHS demand the updated personal information from the IRS of upwards of 7 million undocumented immigrants who pay taxes. Like having Social Security declare undocumented immigrants dead to revoke their Social Security numbers and prevent them from earning wages. Like having DHS stalk social media accounts of students here legally on visas in search of a justification to deport them. The case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not isolated. It could be just an early indication of larger plans. I mean, every action I just listed, and there are more than that, tells us that at a minimum, this administration is preparing to go after more students, to illegally send more illegal residents out of the country, to go to the neighborhoods of more people living in this country to scare them and attempt to kick them out. If the courts don't enforce the law, and if leaders in Congress and states don't do enough to fight it, what's going to stop the Trump administration from attempting to do the same thing to U.S. citizens? I mean, today we got reporting about an immigration lawyer in Massachusetts, and a born and raised American citizen, by the way, who got a notice from the Department of Homeland Security saying this: it's time for you to leave the United States. And do not attempt to remain in the United States. The federal government will find you. Now, this lawyer is pretty sure she received the letter in error, and she probably did. But now we know how this administration feels about deporting American citizens. Trump said it himself today. We also know how they feel about what happens when they deport someone by mistake. It's not their responsibility. Look, as I said, the tariff issue is breaking through because it affects everyone. Of course it does. And maybe this president's immigration policy still feels far away, like it won't impact you, like it won't impact your neighbor. But based on everything we heard from Donald Trump and everything he said today, based on everything his administration is doing behind the scenes to turn those words into actions, or at least be prepared to, it could start to feel closer and closer and closer to all of us. Bear with me for just like a moment here for a little bit of an American history class. But we've been down this road before, which is important to remember. I mean, one of the grievances against the British listed in the Declaration of Independence was that they would send Americans overseas for trial. And at least once before, the Supreme Court rejected a U.S. effort to send people to be tried abroad because of concerns that the same could be done to American citizens. In 1841, another Massachusetts resident, former President John Quincy Adams, right there in that picture, argued before the Supreme Court in the famed Amistad case, defending the enslaved Africans who revolted and took over a Spanish ship. Now, the U.S. government argued that the Africans should be sent back to Africa and tried in court overseas. But Adams won the case, arguing, quote, if the president has the power to do it in the case of Africans and send them beyond seas for trial, he could do it by the same authority in the case of American citizens. He said that in 1841, nearly 200 years ago. But it was the Supreme Court that agreed and stopped the government from doing so. But this time around, Donald Trump is defying the Supreme Court. He's ignoring them. And the judicial branch may not be able to stop Trump and the executive branch on its own. That leaves one other branch. And yes, Republicans are in charge of both the House and the Senate, but there are powers that every member of Congress can use to fight back, including the power to use their platforms, draw attention, and call things out.
We are back with Vaughn, Judge Luttig, and Andrew. Andrew, our friend Dr. Timothy Snyder, the author of On Tyranny, writes this, quote, President Donald Trump told his Salvadoran counterpart that, quote, homegrowns are next, and that El Salvador would, quote, need to build about 5 more places to hold American citizens. So the President of the United States proposes on camera to deport Americans to foreign concentration camps. Perhaps the worst part is the laughter of the Americans. Your thoughts on this spectacle in the Oval Office?
Leave aside that you've got the president and the vice president and the secretary of state there. You have the sitting attorney general of the United States who knows that that is illegal, who knows that there's been no request, not even an ask, to have Mr. Garcia returned, which would be at least one initial step of compliance with the Supreme Court decision that there'd be that facilitation. There's been no factual inquiry and given to the district court to comply with that order. I mean, it is, you know, I have to say, Judge Luttig is so much smarter than I am. I am such an institutionalist, and I thought this day would never come. But I want to make sure people understand we are here. Everyone's, at least I have tried to say, you know, we're not yet in that constitutional crisis. That is what is going on right now. The district court is valiantly trying to basically determine that white is white and black is black and just get answers from the administration. And they're hiding behind the sort of thinnest veneer of saying, oh, well, now that this person's out of the country, we can't possibly do anything. We can't even tell you that we asked to have him be returned. It is a complete flouting of the district court, Court of Appeals, and now Supreme Court orders. It is truly remarkable. And as I've said over and over again, it is the complicity is what makes this so different than Trump 1.0, that you don't have the White House counsel, you don't have the Attorney General, you don't have anyone there to say this is not legal, it is not constitutional, it is not how you're supposed to behave in the United States of America. I mean, this really is the Rubicon that I was hoping we would never, ever get to, but that Judge Luttig correctly said this was going to happen, and it has. This is where we are. It is now going to be up to the Supreme Court to actually show some steel and backbone to to find that this is in violation of their order and take as drastic steps as they can, and ideally, again, unanimously, about what is happening here, or we really won't have a country left.
You are all taking my breath away with the clarity of your pronouncements. This piece in the Bulwark did the same thing for me, so I will share it with all of you. If you were Chris Krebs, would you flee the country? Your answer before last week would probably be no. Your answer after last week is probably maybe. Your answer after the coming week might be absolutely. If you are Chris Krebs and this week Bukele refused to return Abrego Garcia and the Supreme Court decides to let Trump get away with it, would you stay in America or would you flee the country for your safety? Let's pretend for a second that you chose to leave. You show up at the Canadian border and file a claim of political asylum, alleging that you are fleeing political persecution in America and have reason to believe that remaining in your homeland would lead to indefinite imprisonment in a Salvadoran concentration camp. What would the Canadian legal system make of such a claim? Would they say this was outlandish and unfounded, or would they believe it is an accurate depiction of what America has become? Judge Luttig, as the esteemed legal mind in our gathering, what do you think?
Well, Nicole, Chris Krebs is one of the finest American citizens in the country today, and he's certainly one of the most courageous American citizens. It's worth reminding your viewers that Chris Krebs was in Donald Trump's first administration in high office as in charge of cybersecurity at Homeland Security, Homeland Security, and he actually was responsible for ensuring that the election of 2020 was safe from cybersecurity attacks. And once the election was over, and he determined that it had not been influenced in any way whatsoever by cybersecurity or cyber attack, he publicly made that statement, as it was his obligation to do as the person who held that office at Homeland Security. It is that statement which Donald Trump interpreted as a denial of his assertion that the 2020 election was stolen that led to the outrageous executive order against Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor last week. I said, as soon as that executive order issued, that was the most corrupt and constitutionally corrupt executive order that Donald Trump had issued to date at that point. But let me return to the Bulwark's point. Again, Chris Krebs is a friend, and he's one of the most courageous American citizens today. I read that Bulwark thing, and I had been talking to Chris Krebs, and it was heartbreaking to read the Bulwark piece. And I was reading it with my wife in the room, and I was reading it out loud. And when I finished, I said, this is America today because of the President of the United States. The point made, whether or not it's true, the point made is that what Donald Trump is doing today to other residents and citizens of the United States, he could do to any one of us. Any one of us. And the American people must understand that. Donald Trump is willing and fully prepared to grab off the street and deport any person in this country that he believes ought not be here. And that includes any of us, Nicole, not just his so-called enemies.
In Silicon Valley, in the Northern California towns of Palo Alto and Menlo Park and Redwood City, there is something going on with the crosswalks. And not like the part of the street that's blocked off where you walk across in the crosswalk, but actually at the pole on the corner. You know, when you want to cross with the light, you get to the crosswalk, you push the button on the pole to tell the system that you want to cross. Northern California is one of the places where when you push that button, an automated voice usually activates, right? Telling you to wait until it is safe to walk. But in these at least 3 Silicon Valley towns as of this weekend, this is what started happening when you hit the crosswalk button. Instead of the normal automated voice telling you to wait until it was safe to walk, instead this other thing now happens. And I want to tell you before you hear this, this is not the real voice of Elon Musk.
Wait. Hi, this is Elon Musk. Welcome to Palo Alto, the home of Tesla engineering. You know, they say money can't buy happiness, and yeah, okay. I guess that's true. God knows I've tried. But it can buy a Cybertruck, and that's pretty sick, right? Right? I'm so alone.
Says at the end there, F word, I'm so alone. That is obviously not the real voice of Elon Musk. It appears to be an AI-generated audio clone of Elon Musk's voice. People have apparently somehow hacked into the crosswalk systems in this handful of towns in Silicon Valley so that in these towns, when you push the crosswalk button, you get a message like that one or one like this.
Hi, I'm Elon. Can we be friends? Will you be my friend? I'll give you a Cybertruck, I promise. Okay, look, you don't know the level of depravity I would stoop to just for a crumb of approval. I mean, let's be real. It's not like I had any moral convictions to begin with, right?
Again, that is not Elon Musk's actual voice. Somebody has apparently used AI to make these fake messages that sound like Elon Musk's voice. There's another one that says, hi, this is Elon Musk. I'd like to personally welcome you to Palo Alto. You know, people keep saying cancer is bad, but have you ever tried being a cancer? It's effing awesome. There's another with a fake A voice that sounds like President Trump. And the Musk voice starts talking about how he feels about Trump. And then the Trump voice interrupts and says, sweetie, come back to bed. That one's super creepy. There's also a couple of these things that feature not Elon Musk, but instead the fake voice of Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg in these fake AI-generated recordings claiming credit for undermining democracy and making life miserable for trans people and, quote, cooking our grandparents' brains with AI slop. So there's been reporting on this from NBC7 in the Bay Area and the San Francisco Chronicle and Palo Alto Online and also from The Verge. Everybody basically trying to figure out how this was done, how you hack into these crosswalk systems and who might have done it. I don't think anybody's trying to figure out why they did it. Motive seems pretty obvious. May I also introduce you to the free Tesla debadging station that was set up this weekend in Seattle, Washington. Now, there was an anti-Trump, anti-Elon Musk protest this weekend at a Tesla dealership in Seattle. There's been a bunch of these in Seattle in recent weeks, of course. There were a bunch more all over the country this weekend and even today. We'll get to that in a second. But at the Seattle Tesla dealership anti-Trump, anti-Musk protest this weekend, they did something a little different. People also showed up there and set up what they called a free debadging station for your Tesla, for people with, quote, Tesla regret. How do you take the badge, meaning like the emblem, off your Tesla? Well, you use a heat gun or a hairdryer to warm it up, soften it up. Then you use some fishing line to basically kind of cut through the adhesive on the back of the emblem. Then after you've pulled it off, you use like Goo Gone or rubbing alcohol, some other kind of solvent to take off the rest of the adhesive that's left behind. That's the hardest part. But then you don't anymore have Tesla badges on your car. And in the case of this free Tesla debadging clinic in Seattle this weekend, they also were apparently happy to stick on a replacement car emblem from a totally different car company if you, say, wanted to pretend that your Tesla is now an Audi, or frankly, any other brand of car that isn't, associated with the authoritarian takeover and destruction of the United States government. We'll turn your Tesla into something that doesn't look like a Tesla. Free. And you see they've got that sign there in the upper right, says Tesla Regret, and it's got a toll-free number and then a website. If you call the toll-free number associated with the free debadging Tesla Regret effort, there actually is an answer at that line. It sounds like it's the kind of thing that you'd encounter if you called a toll-free number for a pharmaceutical product or for like medical advice or something, but it's actually a recording to help you handle your own Tesla Regret Syndrome. Tesla Regret Syndrome, TRS.
TRS is a condition afflicting tens of thousands of Tesla owners. It's characterized by persistent feelings of deep discomfort when driving a Tesla you bought because you cared about the future, only to find that the CEO is a fascist megalomaniac out to destroy the U.S. government and sell it for parts, then enrich himself with contracts to do some of the same work. Please listen carefully to the following treatment options before making a selection. If you own a Tesla and aren't sure why you should sell, press 1. If you can't afford to sell your older Tesla, press 2. If you are simply attached to your Tesla and don't want to sell, press 3. If you own a Cybertruck, it's probably best for you to hang up now and deal with the latest recall.
If you own a Cybertruck, it's probably best for you to hang up now and deal with the latest recall. The press 1, press 2, press 3 options, those are real. They actually they connect you to, if you press 1 because you're not sure if you should sell your Tesla, you get a recording explaining that it will make a difference because if you sell your Tesla, because flooding the market with used Teslas will bring down the price of all Teslas. It will make them all lose value, even the new ones. If you press 2 because you want to sell your older Tesla, but you can't afford to, you get a recording saying, sometimes you're not in a place to sell your car. That's understandable. Do your best, though, to charge it home so Musk gets no money out of you. And please come to a peaceful Tesla takedown protest when you can. We promise you won't be the only Tesla driver there. So that's if you press 1 or if you press 2. If you press 3, they say press 3 if you are simply attached to your Tesla and don't want to sell. This is the recording that you get.
We're sorry. Doing the right thing is hard sometimes. Sadly, we can't fix that. But we can tell you that people who choose to completely excise Tesla from their lives report feelings of calm, satisfaction, and even profound well-being, both because no one glares at them anymore when they get in and out of their cars, and because they feel connected to a broader effort to rescue our democracy.
The Tesla Regret Syndrome hotline. So Seattle, Washington really kicking it up a notch as of this weekend by pairing their anti-Trump, anti-Musk protests outside Tesla dealerships now with free Tesla emblem removal for any Tesla car and a free hotline to call to get help with your Tesla Regret Syndrome. There were hundreds of people at an anti-Trump, anti-Musk protest at the Tesla dealership this weekend in Columbus, Ohio. There were hundreds more in Tucson, Arizona, at the Tesla dealership there. There were scrappy anti-Tesla, anti-Trump, anti-Musk protests, including some in bad weather in Little Hadley, Massachusetts, at North Phoenix in Arizona, at the Tesla dealership in Stanford, California, at the Stanford Mall, and this one at Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was just at lunchtime today.
Just hours ago, a 38-year-old man was arraigned in court on charges including attempted homicide and terrorism for allegedly forcibly entering Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home and setting it on fire just hours after Shapiro and his family hosted Passover Seder. No one was injured, but the governor's mansion suffered significant damage. Yesterday, Governor Shapiro spoke out against political violence.
This type of violence is not okay. This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society. And I don't give a damn if it's coming from one particular side or the other, directed at one particular party or another, or one particular person or another. It is not okay. And it has to stop. We have to be better than this.
My panel is back with me, Sabrina Singh, April Ryan, and George Conway. George, this is from the affidavit. NBC News has some details from it. It reads, the criminal affidavit filed Monday morning states the Balmer, which is the gentleman in question, added he would have beaten Shapiro with a hammer if confronted. Balmer admitted to harboring hatred towards Governor Shapiro. The affidavit states without any additional detail. I should note the judge denied this man bail and recommended imprisonment for the safety of himself and the community. If you want to combat, then we don't know. We have to let the investigation play out. But obviously, the Passover Seder happened earlier that evening, and then hours later, this man attempted to enter the governor's home and set fire to it. We don't know if he had motivations that had to do with the fact that the governor was Jewish, but an investigation will vet that out. But what we do know is this is a long line and a string of political attacks. And I remember very vividly when President Trump was the attempted shooting against him, and all the Democrats and the Republicans spoke out, and you had a Democrat spin it over backwards and say, we have to take the temperature down, we have to bring the temperature down, when they weren't even the people that ratcheted the temperature up.
Right.
The people that ratcheted the temperature up, the folks that should have been the loudest here, in my opinion, it should have been coming from the Oval Office. But today, all Donald Trump had to say, and I'm going to paraphrase here, the attacker wasn't a fan of Trump. I understand from what I read and from what I've been told, said the president, the attacker basically wasn't a fan of anybody. He probably just a whack job. And certainly a thing like that cannot be allowed to happen.
Me, 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 me. That's what Donald Trump is all about. Me. Those are his pronouns. Me, me, me. Oh. And, he doesn't, the thing that he noticed, though, he didn't say, this is the guy I want to send to El Salvador. Okay? To him, it doesn't matter because it didn't happen to him. Okay? And it doesn't score him political points. He's concerned about whether or not people are going to blame him. He's not concerned about the problem, which Josh Shapiro is concerned about, which, as Josh Shapiro points out, goes both ways. But Donald Trump doesn't actually care about that, doesn't care about anybody else's well-being, and that's why you got that reaction.
What do you want to say? Because I just can't.
Well, I mean,
I can't. Between the people throwing Mocktail cocktails at the Tesla dealership, like there are people who are mothers and fathers and people's brothers and sisters who work at the Tesla dealerships. Just don't buy a damn Tesla.
I completely agree. I think what is so horrific here is that there are kids. His family was in that home, And to your point about the Tesla dealerships, these are people just going to work. They are just going to work to make a living for themselves, to provide for their families. So you don't want to buy a Tesla, don't buy a Tesla. You don't support the governor, don't vote for him. But this type of violence that we're seeing, and I think what Josh Shapiro was really getting at is it is, just continuing on both sides, and that really does need to stop. You can protest, you can make your voice heard. This country allows, right now, for free speech. We can voice that. You can take in protest peacefully, but doing something like this should be condemned on every single side of the aisle. And frankly, from the person that has the biggest megaphone and the point of power, say something in the Oval Office and say, we don't agree on everything, but I stand with Governor Shapiro.
April, go right ahead.
And the person who now has a portrait in the White House in the Cross Hall with a picture of when he was fighting back, when the bullet went across his ear during a campaign speech, you would think he would understand and say exactly that, supporting Josh Shapiro in that moment. But the bigger issue of this, in piggybacking off of what everyone says, the fear of copycats, let's just put it there. Because once you see something like this, that someone got at least that close, police, law enforcement in every state, looking at every governor's office, even looking at the White House and Capitol Hill, they are watching this. Because this sends a signal to those who are not stable emotionally or mentally. This is a time that the President of the United States needs to come out. It's not about party, it's about people. And this is a time when the President of the United States, I was shocked that he did not use that time in the Oval Office when asked that question towards the end of that press conference in the Oval Office to condemn that.
Well,
as someone who was a subject
because I'm not shocked because he's a man with no empathy.
I have covered 5 presidents. I am shocked still. There's still something called humanity.
He doesn't have that.
Someone who was actually shot himself, you would think that there was humanity in that moment.
I want to bring in NBC News White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung, and co-host of Bloomberg Business Week, Tim Stenovec. So, Gabe, at the White House, the president unleashing these tariffs, then his administration exempting these products that we were just talking about. Then he said there was no exception. Is this a strategy here?
Hi there, Jose. Good morning. Well, the White House is really struggling to explain all of this, not just over the weekend, but even this morning. As you said, the exemptions announced on Friday by Customs and Border Protection. Then on Sunday, Peter Navarro, for example, saying there were no exemptions. Howard Lutnick saying there were exceptions, but they might be temporary. And this morning, we heard from the president's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, reiterating the idea that these were not really exemptions, that they're just tariffs in different buckets. Take a listen to what Kevin Hassett said just a few moments ago.
What we're talking about is coverage, and so what's going to be covered, and pretty much everything's going to be covered. I think that it all has been very carefully designed and makes a good deal of sense. Just before I came in, equities were up a lot. I think the equilibrium policies of the president are going to be very, very good for the country and for equities.
That was the director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. He was also asked whether the administration was concerned that China is meeting with other countries such as Spain and Vietnam, and whether all these tariffs could be driving our allies closer to China. His response was that they're always concerned about China. Jose?
Yeah, and Tim, just wondering, I mean, this back and forth, the Wall Street Journal describes it as a confusing weekend. How do you describe it, and what's the impact on, yes, Wall Street, but on Main Street and also just around the world?
Well, roller coaster whiplash, call it what you will. I think it's fair to say there's this sense of confusion when it comes to the way that companies are trying to understand this new environment. Think about it from the perspective of, your own world. If you're the CEO of your home, right? You're planning your vacations, you're planning your budgets for the year. You know how much money is coming in, so you can know how much money is going out. If you're the CEO of one of these companies, you don't necessarily know what your margins are going to be because you have no idea what the rate on tariffs is going to be on your products. And it could change just in a matter of hours, as we've seen several times over the past couple of weeks.
And that includes, like, how much do we put in our R&D? I mean, all of these questions that you have to think in advance. However, the reality is that the fact is there are tariffs, right? 10% or 145%. Right. How does that play into a CEO's thinking going forward? And does it matter that it's 10% versus 145%?
Yeah, it definitely matters. I mean, 10% is 10%. That's, I would say, doable and manageable for a lot of these companies. 145% is, some analysts would say, that's almost laughable at this point. And China, in fact, called it, in so many words, an unserious number. I mean, that's a prohibitively high tariff. I think a lot of folks out there would say, we don't necessarily think it's going to remain at 145%. I mean, just look at what happened over the weekend. Unclear what happens when it comes to sectoral tariffs and semiconductors and where exactly it will fall. But if this ends up happening, we can expect to pay more for certain items that are affected by tariffs.
And just to kind of jump on to Tim's point, I was speaking with a toy manufacturer the other day here in the United States who said that at 145%, actually any increase beyond that would be marginal because he's essentially stopped his shipments. He makes Care Bears and Tonka trucks, and he was saying that, well, at 145%, the math doesn't math. So he can't turn a profit even if he wanted to raise the price because he would have to raise it so much that consumers would balk. They just wouldn't buy those bears or those toy trucks. So you do start to worry about the global supply chain already kind of screeching to a halt in just the view of this uncertainty because they're saying, look, at 145%, that's just a comic large number. Actually, the verbate that this CEO told me was that you might as well just jack it up to 3 billion% because I'm not shipping anything to the United States.
Kevin O'Leary last week right here on one of the hours that I was privileged enough to anchor said that it should be 400% tariffs on China. I'm just wondering when the vice president and the president has said that really this is about realigning the world economic order. Is something like 145% tariffs on the country that makes most of the things that we import a real way to help in that realignment?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, no question that the president would love to see iPhones made here in the U.S. Our own Mark Gurman at Bloomberg has reported what a challenge that would be. He spoke to somebody last week who was experiencing the Apple supply chain who mentioned there are millions of people in China already who are part of Apple's supply chain. If you wanted to bring iPhone production to the U.S., one person told him, you'd have to essentially tell the entire city of Boston to drop everything that they're doing, and they're going to be making iPhones right now. There are literally places in China called iPhone City for a reason.
No, and I mean, and in China there are places.
So what I'm saying is
where labor is exploited to the degree where if you're a Uyghur, you know, you're forced to be in production of things under the most dire circumstances possible. So you know, cheap labor in many ways includes some really human rights violations that we aren't accustomed to in our country. But is there a possibility that iPhones or anything else can be brought to the United States, kind of maybe not in the short term, but in the mid term?
I mean, in theory, yes, but I think the question is really whether or not you measure that in years or decades, because it can't be done even in many cases over the course of a presidential administration. And I think that the important point to remember here is that it's not just the construction of the facility, which would require an enormous amount of capex, by the way, billions of dollars, but it's staffing up to the point that you guys just made.
Yeah, it's training. I mean, in 2017, Tim Cook basically said the reason we're in China is not because the labor is cheap. The reason we're there is because they know what they're doing. They have the education. They understand the machinery, and they understand how to make these things. We couldn't do that in the United States at this point. I will say Apple has been diversifying its supply chain. Over the last 10 years, they've tried to move production of some iPhones to India. That's taken a decade at this point.
Some computers made in the States already.
Well, it's the finishing portion of the computers in Texas, and it's a very small number. And that was during the first Trump administration, but it does show that Tim Cook, he knew how to navigate that. This is just a completely different beast.
And so, Gabe, has the Trump administration opened any direct talks with the Chinese regime at all?
No, Jose, not as of yet. And of course, this is hugely significant and would be the next, the procession behind me. El Salvador's president is set to arrive here at the White House within the next hour or so. This is something that the U.S. needs to do in the next step of this trade war. But so far, we do not have any details. The U.S. Trade Representative was interviewed over the weekend about this, and he said as much. Listen.
Are there any plans for Presidents Trump and Xi to speak?
Right now, we don't have any plans on that. This issue is truly at the leaders' level. Before April 2nd, I had a conversation with my counterpart, and others did. Since April 2nd, we have this at the leaders' level, and at some point, as President Trump has pointed out, we expect that we'll be able to have a conversation with them.
As you alluded to earlier, late last week, China referred to the tariff policies as unserious or a joke. But again, no scheduled meeting or talk between President Xi and President Trump. Later today, though, he is expected to meet with El Salvador's President Bukele and also later this week with the Italian Prime Minister, Jose.
And Tim, the New York Times reports that China, I should say, is retaliating by suspending, among other things, the exports of minerals and magnets that are, used in all kinds of things, and automobiles, semiconductors, et cetera. What kind of an impact is that going to have?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, these are rare earths and critical minerals, and they have the term rare earth, some of these, and they're not actually that rare. What is rare is who actually does the processing of these, and that's China. In some cases, more than 80%. In some cases, more than 90% of the processing of these minerals is done in China. So they have the control of the processing, which means they hold the supplies that these companies need. It's an issue for defense. It can be an issue for energy production. It could be an issue for manufacturing. And it's interesting because it's a very small portion of the Chinese economy, but it gives them certainly leverage when it comes to negotiation.
One is reminded of that supposed negotiation and agreement that the president had agreed with the president of Ukraine on rare earth minerals, that apparently we're still waiting for that to happen. What's the impact of something like this long term, you think, Brian?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that in many ways, because the trade war has kind of narrowed down to the United States and China, even though I want to point out 10% on other countries is actually still substantial in many cases. But because we kind of zoned in on China, I think that we're kind of entering the stage of this trade war that resembles a lot of what the first administration looked like, where the markets and politicians in D.C. and everyone inside the Beltway was really paying attention to, is there a meeting on the calendar between Chinese and U.S. officials? At what high level are those meetings? Because I think that that's going to be very much the tell as these two largest economies in the world are going at each other, whether or not there can be a resolution and whether it can be quick.
And so far as Gabe is telling us, no direct high-level conversations between the Chinese regime and the Trump administration. Gabe Gutierrez, Brian Chung, Tim Stenovac, thank you very much.